Before we begin, drop a comment below with your country and what time is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France. I want to know. Don't just sit back. Tell me where in the world you are. Now, let's dive into the story. The noose swung lazily in the hot afternoon air, creaking against a wooden beam as the crowd pressed closer. Dust rose in choking clouds, kicked up by boots and horses, but Seraphine Lane hardly noticed. Her eyes were locked on him. Kael Maddox, the outlaw whose name was whispered in every saloon and spat out by every lawman. His shirt was torn, blood drying against his collar, his wrists bound in rusted iron. The sheriff, red-faced and sweating, shouted over the murmurs, "A bounty's been on his head, and today justice comes to Willow Creek." The crowd roared approval, waving hats, spitting curses, tossing stones at the man who stood half-broken in chains. Seraphine pressed her back against the shaded post of the mercantile, hiding her face beneath her bonnet. If anyone saw the storm of love and terror burning in her eyes, it would ruin her. For weeks, she had prayed this day would never come. Yet here he was beaten, mocked, and paraded like an animal. She bit down hard on her trembling lip, because the man they condemned was the only one she had ever loved, and her silence was killing her. Kael swayed under the sun, his boots dragging across the rough boards as deputies forced him forward. The townsfolk laughed when his knees buckled. Someone shouted, "Hang him high!" Another voice jeered, "Cut his tongue out first." Seraphine's stomach twisted with every word. She remembered his hands, gentle, scarred, but steady, when they had touched her own in the quiet of her father's barn. That memory clashed violently with the image before her now. Those same hands bound, wrists bleeding, shoulders slumped in defeat. The sheriff raised a wanted poster for all to see. Kael's name scrawled beneath the crude sketch, a reward some glinting in the sunlight. $50. That was all a man's life was worth here. Seraphine's chest burned with a mix of rage and despair. How could strangers cheer for his death without ever knowing the truth of him? She felt her breath catch as Kael suddenly lifted his head. His eyes, bloodshot, swollen, but still blazing, swept across the crowd like a dying flame searching for oxygen. And then, impossibly, they found her. His gaze locked onto hers through the sea of faces, and for a heartbeat, the noise of the mob fell away into silence. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She wanted to look away, to hide, but she couldn't. His stare rooted her to the earth. It wasn't just recognition, it was a plea. Seraphine clutched her skirt in white-knuckled fists, torn between stepping forward or melting into the crowd. Every part of her screamed to rush the gallows, to shout his innocence until her voice broke. But what then? She would be branded as the outlaw's whore cast out, or worse, hang beside him. Her father's stern voice echoed in her mind. A woman's reputation is her life. Lose that and you're nothing. Yet hadn't her father also taught her to fight for what was right, no matter the cost? A tear slid down her cheek as the deputies shoved Kael beneath the gallows beam. He stumbled, but before they forced his head toward a rope, he gave the smallest shake, the faintest nod, as if to say, "Don't, not yet." Seraphine's hands trembled at her sides. Her breath came shallow. The world spun dizzy with dust and dread. Around her, the crowd clapped and hollered for death. But inside her chest, a single voice whispered louder than all the others, "Save him. Save him now." The sheriff barked orders, and the rope slipped tight around Kael's throat. The wooden lever loomed, ready to end him with a pull. Seraphine's nails dug crescents into her palms. Each second dragged like a blade. She thought of the secret nights they had shared, the stolen bread, the whispered stories, the firelight dancing across his tired smile. She remembered the scar along his jaw, the one he said came from saving his younger brother. She remembered the softness in his voice when he swore he'd leave the outlaw's path behind. And she remembered the night she had whispered, "I love you," and how his silence that followed had hurt more than any blade. Now, staring at him bound and broken, she realized that silence had been no rejection. It had been fear. Fear of pulling her into his cursed life. Seraphine felt heat rise in her chest, anger burning away doubt. If she stayed silent now, she would be bearing not just him but every truth they had shared. The sheriff's hand moved toward the lever. The crowd leaned forward, hungry for the drop, and Seraphine, breath caught in her throat, took one trembling step out from the shadows. The crowd barely noticed her at first, a slip of a girl in a faded blue dress. But Kael saw. His eyes widened, a mix of horror and desperate gratitude. "No!" His lips formed silently, though no sound reached her. The sheriff's head snapped toward her as she emerged from the mercantile shade, bonnet tilted back. Tear-streaked face revealed all of Willow Creek. Murmurs rippled like wildfire. "Lane girl. What's she doing? She knows the outlaw?" Seraphine's pulse thundered, but she forced her chin high. Her legs threatened to buckle, yet something in her soul locked her spine straight. She had hidden long enough. She would not watch him die in silence. With her voice shaking but loud enough to cut through the jeers, she cried out, "Stop!" The word cracked like a whip. The sheriff's hand froze above the lever. The crowd fell still. Dozens of eyes pinned her in place, waiting. Her breath trembled, but she didn't look away. She looked at Kael, at the man condemned, at the man she loved despite the world hatred. The silence grew unbearable. Then, louder, steadier, Seraphine's voice rang out across the square. "You don't know the truth about him, but I do." 2 months earlier, the desert wind had carried a different story. Seraphine Lane knelt by the barn door that evening, lantern light flickering across her face as she pressed a damp cloth against the stranger's chest. His blood soaked through her apron, but his eyes, storm gray, sharp even in pain, followed her every movement. She had found him slumped near the dried riverbed, half dead from a gunfight. Every sensible thought had screamed at her to leave him. He was an outlaw. She knew it at first glance. The black revolver at his side, the bullet hole near his ribs, and the wanted poster she'd seen tacked up in town proved it. And yet, when he had whispered her name, Seraphine, without knowing how, something in her had cracked. She couldn't abandon him. Not to the vultures, not to the sheriff, not to fate. Her father's ranch was already struggling. The debts, the drought, the loneliness of keeping it alive had weighed on her shoulders like chains. But looking at Kael Maddox, broken and gasping, she realized she wasn't just saving a wounded man. She was saving a part of herself she thought had already died, the part that still longed to fight for something worth the risk. Kael groaned as she stitched his wound with trembling fingers, the lantern swaying above them. "You'll get yourself killed for this," he muttered through clenched teeth. His voice was deep, steady even through the pain, like a man too used to bleeding. Seraphine glanced at him sharply. "And what will you do? Bleed out on my barn floor? I won't let that happen." She had no idea where the strength in her words came from. Maybe it was the years of silence, of being told by her father and the neighbors that women were meant to keep their heads down, stay clean, stay proper. Maybe it was the way Kael's eyes burned with a strange defiance, even on the edge of death. Whatever it was, Seraphine found herself drawn to him like a moth to flame. For days, she kept him hidden. She smuggled food when her father slept, whispered warnings when riders passed near the ranch. Each night, as cicadas sang and coyotes howled in the distance, she sat with him in the barn. They talked in low voices, sometimes falling into long silences. But those silences were not empty. They were charged, heavy with the unspoken truth building between them. By the end of the first week, Seraphine knew she was no longer just nursing a stranger. She was falling into something dangerous, something reckless. She caught herself memorizing the scar along his jaw, the way his lips pressed into a hard line when pain gripped him. She watched how his eyes softened when she spoke of her mother, who had died when Seraphine was young. He listened, not out of politeness, but like her words mattered in a way few men had ever treated them. One night, when Kael could finally stand, he reached for her hand. His palm was rough, callous, and scarred, but it closed around hers with surprising care. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, voice low. She swallowed hard, unable to answer. How could she admit that every moment with him made her heart race in ways it never had? How could she say she felt safer with this wanted man than she did with any law-abiding suitor the town had tried to force upon her? She looked into his eyes, searching, trembling, the words stuck in her throat. And yet, in that silence, she knew he had already heard the answer. Her father noticed her distraction. At supper, he slammed his cup on the table and fixed her with a sharp glare. "Something's keeping you from your chores," he barked, "and I'll have none of it." Seraphine forced her gaze down to her plate, nodding obediently. But inside, her heart thudded like a war drum. Each lie she told, each moment she slipped away to the barn, was another thread pulling tighter around her neck. The townsfolk were hungry for bounty money. If anyone discovered Kael under her roof, they would sell him out in an instant and drag her down with him. But despite the danger, she found herself waiting for the barn more than the safety of her bed. When she returned that night, she found Kael awake, sitting on a bale of hay, his revolver cleaned and resting across his lap. "You should have left me," he said quietly, almost like a prayer. "I bring nothing but trouble." She leaned against the post, folding her arms to steady herself. Maybe trouble's better than silence. For a moment, neither moved. Then, almost without realizing it, Seraphine smiled. And for the first time in years, she felt alive. But even as their bond grew, the weight of Kael's past hung over them like a noose. He confessed pieces of in fragments. A murdered brother, a gang that had once been family, but had turned to bloodlust and betrayal. A lawman who had lied, twisting the truth until Kael's name became poison across the territory. Seraphine listened with wide eyes, every word etching itself deeper into her soul. He wasn't just a man on the run. He was a man carrying grief like an open wound, shame like a brand burned into his skin. And still, her heart leaned closer, reckless and unafraid. That night, she dreamed of him, not as an outlaw, but as someone whole, someone free. When she awoke, she prayed silently that such a day could come. Yet, deep down, she knew freedom would never be handed to a man like Kael Maddox. He was hunted, hated, and chained to shadows. And by saving him, she had tied herself to those same shadows. As dawn painted the sky pale gold, Seraphine stood by the barn door, watching him sleep. She whispered into the rising wind, "I don't care." The words slipped away like a vow she couldn't take back. The nights in Willow Creek stretched long and heavy, filled with cicadas buzzing in the cottonwoods and the faint cry of coyotes on the horizon. Seraphine found herself listening for Kael more than for the night sounds. His breath, ragged but steady, the soft scrape of his boots when he paced the barn to keep his wound from stiffening. He had grown stronger, though the limp in his step lingered. By lantern glow, his shadow stretched tall against the barn wall, reminding her that he was more than a fugitive. He was a man, flesh and blood, close enough to touch. Yet every time her hand hovered near his, fear gripped her. She imagined her father's fury, the town's scorn, the gallows rope already waiting. And still she stayed. One evening, as she carried a basket of bread and dried meat into the barn, she caught him staring at her. His eyes were softer than she had ever seen, and for a heartbeat, she thought he might speak words that would change everything. Instead, he only muttered, "You shouldn't be here." Her lips curved in a faint smile. "Then stop needing me," she whispered back. But they both knew that was impossible. The bond between them deepened in stolen glances and unspoken confessions. When Seraphine brushed the hair from his forehead to check his fever, his jaw tightened, not from pain but from restraint. When her hand lingered too long over his bandages, she felt his breath hitch. There were nights she lay awake in her narrow bed, fingers trembling, imagining his arms around her, his lips pressed to hers. And yet, Kael kept a distance, drawing a wall of silence between them. He told her fragments of his past, but never the whole story. He never spoke of what tomorrow might bring. He seemed determined to let her see only the edges of him, never the full picture. But Seraphine was no longer a girl who accepted half-truths. She needed more. One night, after a long silence, she finally asked, "Is there someone waiting for you? A wife? A child?" Kael looked at her sharply, then down at his scarred hands. "There was only my brother," he said quietly, "and he's gone." His voice cracked like dry timber. Seraphine's heart twisted. She wanted to reach for him, to ease that grief, but she held back, because she feared once she touched, she'd never let go. Life outside the barn began to notice her absence. At the general store, whispers followed her as she bought extra flour and salted pork. "That Lane girl eats like an army," one woman muttered. Her cheeks burned under their stares, but she forced a smile, clutching her basket close. The weight of suspicion pressed in tighter with each passing day. Her father, weary from debts and labor, grew sharper with his words. "Don't think I don't see you sneaking off," he warned, slamming the ledger shut one evening. "Whatever foolishness you're hiding will end this family." Seraphine bit her tongue until it bled, unwilling to confess the truth. At night, she returned to Kael with her fear wrapped around her like a cloak. He listened, silent and steady, his gaze never leaving her face. "You'll lose everything if you keep me here," he told her. She met his eyes, her voice trembling but fierce. "Maybe everything was already lost. Maybe you're the only thing I found worth keeping." For the first time, Kael's mask cracked. His hand lifted as if to touch her cheek, then froze halfway. His restraint was agony. But in that moment, Seraphine saw it clearly. He loved her too. The first kiss happened not under the moonlight, but in the raw silence of dawn. Seraphine had come early, to soak in the hem of her dress, hair still damp from hurried washing. She found Kael sitting on the stall rail, staring out at the pale streaks of morning. His face was hard, unreadable, until he turned toward her. Something in his eyes, pain, longing, surrender, made her step closer. Words failed them. For weeks they had circled this moment, denying it, burying it, fearing it. Now, the distance between them burned hotter than fire. Seraphine reached up, trembling, and he leaned down. Their lips met softly, hesitantly, like the touch of rain on parched earth. For an instant, the world vanished, the debts, the danger, the noose already tightening around his name. There was only him, only her, and the fragile hope of something forbidden and pure. But when they parted, Kael's expression darkened. He stepped back, his voice rough. "This can't happen." Her heart plummeted, but she squared her shoulders. "It already has," she whispered. Silence stretched between them, sharp as a blade. And though he turned away, Seraphine saw the truth in his eyes. He was already hers, whether he wanted it or not. The days that followed carried both sweetness and dread. They shared stolen kisses, whispered promises, and moments so fragile Seraphine feared breathing might shatter them. Yet every touch carried a shadow, every laugh a reminder that their love was hunted. Rumors in town thickened. An outlaw spotted near the ranch, riders seen at dusk. Each rumor pressed like a nail into Seraphine's chest. One evening, as Kael sharpened his knife in the barn, he said, "I'll be gone soon. I won't drag you into this." Her throat tightened. "You think leaving will save me?" she asked bitterly. "The town already smells blood. They'll tear us apart, whether you're here or not." Kael's jaw clenched, his silence heavy. Seraphine stepped closer, eyes shining with unshed tears. "I don't care about the law. I don't care about the whispers. You're mine, Kael Maddox, bounty or no bounty." He finally looked at her, and something inside him broke. His knife slipped, clattering to the dirt. He cupped her face, his forehead pressing against hers. For a breathless moment, they were one. But in the distance, a rider's whistle cut through the night. Kael's body stiffened. Trouble was already coming for them. The ranch felt heavier with each sunrise, as if the walls themselves carried secrets too large to hold. Seraphine's father, Elias Lane, had grown suspicious. His sharp eyes tracked her every movement, his questions cutting deeper with each passing day. One morning, while Seraphine was hanging clothes on the line, he approached, boots crunching against the gravel. "You've been wandering too much," he said flatly. "Where do you go at night?" The basket trembled in her hands. She forced a calm smile, though her heart pounded against her ribs. "I walk to the stream. Pa helps me think." His stare lingered, doubtful, before he muttered something about weak fences and storm damage. But Seraphine knew. He didn't believe her. That evening, when she carried bread to the barn, she found Kael tense, pacing like a caged wolf. "Someone's watching," he whispered. "I felt it today." Fear shot through her veins, but she tried to mask it with a smile. "It's just Pa. He suspects." Kael's jaw hardened. "Then this can't last." If he finds me, it'll be both our necks." His words cut deep, but Seraphine shook her head. "Then we fight harder." Even as she said it, though, her hands trembled. The storm broke sooner than she expected. 2 nights later, Elias followed her into the barn. Seraphine froze as a lantern light caught her father's face, lined, angry, betrayed, and then slid to Kael, who stood like a shadow in the corner, revolver in hand. Elias's eyes narrowed to slits. "God help you, girl," he spat. "You've brought a wolf into my house." The tension crackled, suffocating. Seraphine's breath hitched, caught between them. "Pa, listen. He's not what they say." "Not what they say?" Elias thundered. "His face is on every wall in town, Seraphine. He's worth more dead than alive." Kael didn't flinch, his voice low and steady. "I never meant her harm. You have my word." Elias barked a bitter laugh. The word of an outlaw, worth less than dirt. He stepped forward, but Seraphine darted between them, arms outstretched. "Please, Pa, just listen. If you turn him in, you'll be sending an innocent man to his death." Elias's jaw tightened. He stared at his daughter as if seeing her for the first time. Not as a child, but as a woman making her own reckless choices. His voice dropped, cold as steel. "Then you'll have to choose Seraphine. Him or your family." The ultimatum shattered her. Seraphine stood frozen, caught between the 2 men who defined her world. The father who had raised her through drought and debt, and the outlaw who had awakened her heart. Kael's eyes burned with quiet pain as if urging her to walk away, to save herself. Elias's glare demanded obedience, demanded loyalty. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling hot down her cheeks. "Pa," she whispered, "you don't know him like I do. He's not just an outlaw. He's—" Her voice faltered, but the word hung unspoken in the air. "Mine." Elias's hand twitched toward his belt, where his pistol rested. Kael's fingers flexed over his revolver, ready if he had to be. The air crackled like lightning before a storm. Seraphine could hardly breathe. Then she stepped closer to Kael, her choice laid bare in that single movement. Elias's face darkened, fury and heartbreak colliding. He spat at the ground, voice trembling with rage. "You'll regret this, both of you." He turned on his heel and stormed out, the barn door slamming so hard the hinges rattled. Seraphine's knees nearly gave way, but Kael caught her, steadying her trembling frame. "You've just chosen a hard road," he murmured. She knew he was right. The days that followed carried a heavy silence. Elias no longer spoke to his daughter except in sharp commands. Fix the fence, fetch the water, tally the accounts. His eyes, once weary but warm, now burned with cold disappointment. Seraphine tried to swallow the ache, but each glance was a wound. Meanwhile, Kael's presence grew harder to hide. Neighbors stopped by, sniffing for gossip. Riders were seen on the ridge at dusk, bounty hunters drawn by rumor. Seraphine lived in a constant state of dread, clutching her shawl tight at night as if it could shield her from the storm coming. One evening, Kael spoke as they sat in the barn's quiet. "I should go." His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed him. "If I leave, maybe they'll forget. Maybe your father will forgive you." Seraphine shook her head fiercely. "If you go, you'll die out there. Alone." Kael gave a hollow laugh. "Better me than you." Her throat tightened. She grabbed his hand, holding it to her chest. "Don't you understand? I'd rather die with you than live a lifetime of silence without you." His jaw clenched, his hand trembling against hers. For the first time, Kael couldn't argue, but fate was already moving faster than their words. That same night, a neighbor's lantern flickered near the ranch fence. Voices carried in the wind, low, hushed, but urgent. Kael stiffened, hand going his revolver. "They're hunting," he muttered. Seraphine's heart slammed against her ribs. She rushed to the window, catching sight of 2 riders scanning the fields. "It's only a matter of time," Kael said, his voice grim. "Your father, he'll turn me in, if only to save you." Seraphine's lips trembled. She wanted to deny it, but deep down, she knew Kael was right. Elias Lane was many things, but he wasn't a coward. If selling Kael meant saving his daughter, he would do it without hesitation. Seraphine buried her face in Kael's chest, her tears soaking his shirt. "Then we'll run," she whispered fiercely. Kael's arms tightened around her, his voice low in her ear. "Running's a hard life." She pulled back just enough to meet his gaze, fire burning in her eyes. "Loving you is harder, but I'll do it anyway." In that moment, Kael knew there was no turning back, whether by rope or by bullet. Their fates were bound, and someone was already closing in. The night air was sharp, carrying whispers of danger through the mesquite trees. Seraphine barely slept, her mind tangled with fear and longing. When dawn broke, she caught sight of someone she thought was a friend, Martha Kincaid, walking down the dirt road toward town with a folded paper clutched to her chest. Seraphine's stomach dropped. She knew instantly what it was, a letter to the sheriff. Martha had always smiled too sweetly, asked too many questions about Seraphine's errands. And now, she was trading trust for coin. Rage and betrayal twisted in Seraphine's chest, but she couldn't stop her, not without exposing Kael. That evening, Kael noticed her trembling hands as she set down supper. "What is it?" he pressed. Tears burned her eyes as she whispered. She told him. "They're coming." His expression hardened, every trace of softness gone. He grabbed his revolver, strapped a worn leather belt across his waist, and pulled her close. "Then we don't wait. We ride." Seraphine's breath shook. She had dreamed of leaving, but not like this. Not chased by bounty hunters and betrayal. Yet when Kael's hand closed over hers, steady and unyielding, she knew there was no choice. The storm was here. The first shots rang out before they even saddled the horse. Bullets cracked against the barn wall, splinters flying. Seraphine screamed as Kael yanked her to the ground, shielding her with his body. "Stay low," he barked, returning fire through the gap in the boards. Voices shouted outside, hard, merciless voices of men hunting for gold more than justice. Seraphine's heart thundered in her throat, each breath a knife. Kael's jaw was set, his eyes burning with the fire of a man who had survived too many ambushes to falter now. He shoved the rifle into her shaking hands. "Can you shoot?" Her pulse raced, but she nodded. He leaned close, his voice low and fierce. "Aim steady. Don't think. Just breathe." The next window shattered as another bullet tore through. Seraphine raised the rifle, hands trembling, and fired into the night. A scream cut through the chaos, one of the riders falling. Her stomach lurched, horror rising, but Kael grabbed her face, forcing her eyes back to his. "You just saved us. Don't you dare regret it." His voice was raw, desperate. She swallowed hard, her fingers tightening on the weapon. For the first time, she wasn't just hiding him. She was fighting beside him. Kael kicked the barn door open, smoke and dust swirling around them. He pulled Seraphine to the waiting mare, a lean chestnut with wild eyes. Bullets zipped past as he hoisted her into the saddle, then swung up behind her. The horse bolted into the dark, hooves pounding against hard earth. The wind tore at Seraphine's hair, her arms gripping the saddle horn as Kael's chest pressed solid against her back. "Hold on," he shouted over the chaos. Behind them, riders gave chase, torches flaring like angry stars. The crack of gunfire echoed across the canyon as the hunters pursued. Seraphine glanced back, fear clawing at her throat. Kael's arm wrapped tight around her waist, steadying her. "Don't look back," he growled. "They'll follow till they tire. We just have to outlast them." The mare lunged across dry creek beds, rocks clattering under her hooves. Seraphine buried her face against Kael's arm, heart hammering so hard it hurt. She had left behind everything. Her home, her father, even her name. All that remained was the outlaw at her back, and the danger clawing at their heels. And yet, through the terror, a fierce fire lit inside her. For the first time, she felt free. They rode until the moon was high, finally slowing in a narrow canyon where shadows cloaked them from sight. The horse's flanks quivered with exhaustion, sweat dripping into the dust. Seraphine slid down, legs buckling beneath her. Kael caught her before she hit the ground, his breath ragged, his shirt dark with blood from a fresh graze along his arm. She gasped, pressing her hand against the wound. "You're hurt." He brushed her concern aside, gripping her chin until her eyes met his. "Forget me? Are you hurt?" The intensity in his gaze stole her breath. Shaking, she whispered. No, his hand lingered, thumb brushing her jaw, before he pulled away, scanning the canyon walls. "We'll rest here, but only for a while. They'll keep hunting." Seraphine sank onto a rock, wrapping her arms around herself. The reality pressed down heavy. There was no going back now. She had traded safety for love, silence or fire. The weight of it should have crushed her. But when Kael crouched beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched, she felt strength rise instead. Their world was ashes, but together they were unbreakable. At least, that was the lie she forced herself to believe. As the night deepened, Seraphine sat awake while Kael dozed lightly, revolver across his chest. She stared at the stars, her mind replaying Martha's betrayal, her father's ultimatum, the smoke of gunfire still burning in her lungs. She should have been broken, but instead, she felt something new, something hardening inside her. Love was no longer soft whispers in the barn. Love was survival. Love was blood on her hands, her finger on a trigger. She reached out, brushing a strand of hair from Kael's forehead as he stirred. His eyes flicked open, catching hers in the starlight. For a long moment, they said nothing. Then, hoarse from exhaustion, he whispered, "You should have let me go." Tears pricked her eyes, but her voice was steady. "You should know by now I don't let go." His chest rose and fell, and though he said nothing more, his hand found hers, fingers lacing tight in the darkness. Above them, the stars wheeled silently on, cold and eternal. But in the canyon shadows, Seraphine clung to the warmth of his hand, knowing the world was already closing in again. And when it came, she would face it aside, no matter the cost. The canyon offered shelter, but not safety. By the third day, Kael's jaw had grown tight, his eyes scanning the horizon as if expecting shadows to come alive. Seraphine noticed a shift. The way he kept his revolver close, the way silence weighed heavier between them. That evening, as the sun bled crimson across the desert sky, she finally asked, "What are you not telling me?" He didn't answer, only stared at the horizon where riders might appear. But she saw the truth in his face. Fear, not for himself, but for her. The answer came at dawn, with the thunder of hooves and the smell of smoke. Seraphine's heart lurched as 6 men rode into the canyon, dust curling behind them. Their leader, a thick-jawed brute named Deke Halloran, reined in his horse with a sneer. Well, if it ain't Kael Maddox," he drawled. "Thought you'd crawl away from us forever?" Kael stepped forward, hand near his revolver. "I told you, I'm done with your blood games." Deke laughed, cruel and sharp. "You don't get be done, brother. Not till the ground swallows you." Seraphine's fingers tightened around her shawl. For the first time, she saw Kael not as her wounded outlaw, but as a hunted wolf, cornered by his own pack. Deke's men dismounted, their spurs clinking against stone. Each one carried scars, tattoos, and eyes that burned with lawless hunger. Seraphine felt the weight of their stares as though knives pressed against her skin. Deke tipped his hat toward her with a mocking grin. "And who's this? A pretty little thing you've been hiding?" Kael stepped between them instantly, his voice cold. "She's no one to you." The gang chuckled darkly, circling like vultures. Seraphine's pulse roared in her ears. She wanted to speak, to deny her fear, but her throat locked tight. Deke's grin widened. "So that's what's kept you from coming back. A woman." He spat into the dirt. "You've gone soft, Kael." Kael's eyes flashed, but his hand didn't waver near his revolver. "I've got nothing left for you," he said flatly. "Your wars ain't mine." The canyon air grew heavy, silence stretching taut like a rope before a hangman's lever. Deke tilted his head, his smile fading. "Then I reckon we'll take what you've got left." His men shifted, hands brushing steel. Kael's body stiffened. Seraphine gripped the rifle he'd taught her to hold, her breath trembling. For the first time, she realized their love wasn't just forbidden. It was a target. The standoff snapped like glass. One of Deke's men lunged forward, and Kael moved like lightning. His revolver barked once, the man crumpling in the dust. Chaos erupted, gunfire shattering the canyon silence, sparks leaping as bullets ricocheted off stone. Seraphine screamed, diving for cover as Kael shoved her behind a boulder. "Stay down!" he roared, firing with deadly precision. The gang answered with a hail of bullets, shouting curses, their boots pounding closer. Dust choked Seraphine's lungs as she fumbled for the rifle. Her hands shook, her ears rang, but she remembered his words. "Don't think. Just breathe." She rose just enough to aim, squeeze the trigger, and another man dropped. Horror surged through her. But so did something fierce, a burning need to protect the man she loved. Kael's arm shielded her as he reloaded, his face grim, lips drawn tight. For a moment, Seraphine caught a glimpse of him she had never seen before, raw, unrelenting, merciless. This was the man the posters warned about, the man whispered of in saloons. But she also saw something else. He wasn't fighting for gold or power. He was fighting for her. And that truth, terrifying and beautiful, made her heart ache in ways words could never hold. The canyon echoed with screams and gunfire until dust and blood stained the earth. When the last shot faded, only 3 riders remained, retreating under Deke's furious command. He glared back at Kael, hatred twisting his face. "This ain't over, Maddox," he spat. "You'll pay for turning your back on us." With that, the survivors galloped out, leaving silence thick as smoke. Seraphine's hands trembled as she lowered the rifle, her body weak, her stomach twisting with nausea. She had killed a man, 2, maybe. The weight of it pressed down on her chest until she couldn't breathe. Kael crouched beside her, gripping her shoulders. His voice was hoarse, almost pleading. "Look at me." She lifted her eyes, tears spilling. "I killed them," she whispered. His thumb brushed her cheek, his gaze steady. "You saved us." His words should have soothed her, but instead they carved deeper, because she had seen the part of him he tried to hide. The outlaw, the killer. And now, part of her carried that same blood. She leaned into him, shaking, her sobs muffled against his chest. Kael held her tight, but his eyes stayed fixed on the canyon mouth, dark and unblinking. He knew this fight had only begun. That night, as they huddled by a small fire in the canyon's shadows, Seraphine couldn't shake the image of the man she had shot. The way he fell, the way silence swallowed him. Her hands still felt heavy, as though the rifle hadn't left them. Kael sat across from her, sharpening his blade, the firelight casting harsh lines across his scarred face. For the first time, she feared him, not because he would hurt her, but because of the darkness that clung to him like a second skin. "You saw it tonight," Kael said quietly, not looking up. "What I am, what I'll always be." Seraphine's throat tightened. She wanted to deny it, to tell him he was wrong, but the truth weighed too heavy. She whispered, "You're not just that." His eyes lifted, piercing hers across the fire. "But enough of me is—" Silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackle of flames. Finally, Seraphine crawled closer, pressing her forehead to his. "Then I'll carry it too," she whispered. "Whatever darkness follows you, it follows me now." Kael's breast shuddered, his hands trembling as they cupped her face. For the first time his walls broke, and he kissed her like a drowning man clinging to air. The canyon became their world. By day, the sun scorched the stone walls until heat shimmered like a fever in the air. By night, the cold cut through their thin blankets, leaving Seraphine shivering against Kael's chest. Days bled into one another, marked by hunger, thirst, and the constant fear of hoofbeats echoing down the valley. Seraphine no longer woke in a soft bed or ate meals from a table. Instead, she chewed dried jerky by a smoky fire, her fingernails rimmed with dust, her dress torn and stiff with sweat. Yet strangely, she felt stronger than she ever had. Each hardship was a test, and with Kael at her side, she refused to break. One afternoon, while Kael scouted the ridge, Seraphine gathered mesquite pods and river weeds, determined to make something more than scraps. When Kael returned, surprised by the small stew bubbling in their battered tin, Seraphine smiled faintly. "See? I can keep you alive, too." He stared at her with something fierce in his eyes. Not just admiration, but awe. She had stopped being the rancher's daughter, who hid him in a barn. She was now his equal in the shadows, learning the cost of loving an outlaw. Still, the silence of the canyon gnawed at her. At night, when Kael kept watch with rifle in hand, Seraphine lay awake, listening to the wind whistle through the rocks. In that silence, her thoughts turned sharp. She thought of her father, alone at the ranch, perhaps hating her for her choice. She thought of Martha, who had traded her trust for coin. She thought of the men she had killed, their faces blurred, but their blood vivid in her memory. Guilt weighed heavy, pressing against her chest until she could hardly breathe. One night, unable to bear it, she whispered across the fire, "Do you ever see their faces? The ones you've killed?" Kael didn't look at her. His eyes stayed fixed on the shadows. "Every night," he said quietly. "They never leave." She swallowed hard, her tears blurring the firelight. "Then how do you live with it?" His jaw clenched. After a long pause, he finally said, "I don't live with it. I carry it. There's a difference." His words chilled her, but they also bound her closer. She realized then that love with Kael was not about escaping pain. It was about choosing to share the burden, no matter how heavy it grew. Kael taught her to shoot, not just in desperation, but with patience. Each morning, he set up bottles on the rocks and handed her his revolver. "Steady your grip," he instructed, his hand guiding hers. The first shots rang wide, her arms trembling, ears ringing, but he was relentless, his voice calm but firm. Again, the desert sun burned her neck, sweat stung her eyes, but she kept trying. By the end of the week, she hit her first target, the bottle shattering into glittering shards. Her laugh, small but fierce, echoed across the canyon. Kael's lips curved into a rare smile. "There's fire in you," he murmured, brushing dust from her cheek. Her heart raced, not just from triumph, but from the way his eyes lingered on her, as if she was no longer the girl who had saved him, but the woman who now stood beside him. That night, as they sat shoulder to shoulder watching the stars, Seraphine whispered, "Maybe I was meant for this life." Kael shook his head sharply. "Don't say that. No one's meant for it. It eats you alive." But she saw the truth in his gaze. He was proud of her, and pride, she realized, was its own kind of love. The days grew harsher, food scarcer. They trapped rabbits, chewed bitter roots, drank from shallow streams that tasted of rust. Yet the real hunger lived in Seraphine's chest, a hunger for safety, for a future that felt less like running. One evening, she pressed Kael for answers. "When will it end? When will we stop running?" His eyes darkened as he stoked the fire. "When they're done hunting me. And that won't be till I'm dead." The word struck her like a slap. "Don't say that," she snapped, voice breaking. "You can't just give up." He looked at her then, weary but honest. "I'm not giving up. I'm telling you the truth. My life's already been written in blood. You shouldn't have to carry it." Her hands trembled as she grabbed his shirt front. "But I chose this. Don't you see? I chose you." Silence fell heavy, broken only by the crackle of fire. Slowly, Kael cupped her face, his thumb brushing away a tear. "Then I pray you never regret it," he whispered. His kiss was deep, desperate, tasting of dust and sorrow. In that moment, Seraphine felt both powerful and doomed. Loving him was both her freedom and her prison. By the third week, Seraphine no longer recognized herself. Her dresses were ragged, her hands blistered, her face sunburnt and smudged with dirt. Yet when she caught her reflection in a pool of water, she saw not weakness but resilience staring back. She had become a fugitive's companion, a fighter, a woman forged in hardship. But just as she began to accept this new self, tragedy struck again. Returning from the ridge one evening, Kael carried a grim look. "The town's turned," he said flatly. "They're not just hunting me anymore. They've named you too. Harboring a fugitive. They want you dead as much as me." Seraphine's breath caught, the ground shifting beneath her. Her father's voice, the town's scorn, Martha's betrayal. All of it closed in at once. She sank to her knees, clutching her chest as if the words were arrows. "Then there's nowhere left," she whispered. Kael crouched beside her, pulling her against him. His voice was low, fierce, unyielding. Then we make our own place. They can hate us, hunt us, burn us, but they'll never take what's ours. In his arms, Seraphine trembled. She realized then that their love wasn't just forbidden. It was a war, and they were already in the thick of it. The news came on a bitter wind. They had been camped in the canyon for days when Kael returned from scouting, his face pale beneath the desert dust. Seraphine rushed him, fear already clawing her chest. "What is it?" she demanded. Kael hesitated, his jaw tight. "It's your father." Her stomach dropped, the world tilting. "No," she whispered. He nodded grimly. "I overheard men in town. Elias Lane was found dead, shot outside the ranch house." The words struck like bullets, hollowing her chest. She staggered back, clutching her shawl, shaking her head violently. "No, he's too strong. He wouldn't." Her voice cracked. Kael reached for her, but she flinched from his touch. "Who did it?" she cried, her voice raw. His silence was unbearable. "Tell me." Finally, his eyes met hers, heavy with sorrow. "They're saying it was me." Seraphine froze, her heart shattering. The canyon blurred around her. The man she loved, the outlaw she had chosen, was now painted not just as a fugitive, but as her father's murderer. And though her soul screamed to defend him, a sliver of doubt pierced deep, sharp enough to bleed. The fire that night burned low, its glow barely touching Seraphine's tear-stained face. Kael sat across from her, shoulders bowed beneath a weight that seemed unbearable. The silence stretched until it cracked her open. "Did you?" she whispered, her voice breaking. His head snapped up, pain flashing in his eyes. "You think I could do that?" Her lips trembled. "I don't know what to think anymore. All I know is he's gone." Her words sliced through the air, leaving only grief behind. Kael rose, pacing like a caged animal. "Your father hated me. He would have sold me out the first chance he got. But I swear to you, Seraphine, I didn't pull that trigger." His voice cracked on the last word, raw with desperation. She wrapped her arms around herself, torn apart by loyalty and love. The man who had taught her to shoot, who had held her through fear, now stood accused of the one crime she could barely breathe to imagine. The canyon walls seemed to close in, their shadows whispering doubts. "Then who did?" she asked, her eyes wet and pleading. Kael's jaw clenched. "Deke Halloran. It's his way. Make me bleed by taking everything I've got." Seraphine's grief twisted into fury. Deke Halloran's name was poison, and she spat it into the dust with trembling lips. "Then he won't stop. He'll keep taking until there's nothing left." Kael crouched in front of her, gripping her hands. "That's why I told you we should have run farther. You should have left me." She wrenched her hands free, fire flashing in her eyes. "Don't you dare put this on me. I chose you, Kael. And now my father's blood is on the ground, whether you spilled or not." Her chest heaved, sobs breaking free. Kael's face crumpled, torn between rage and sorrow. For the first time, their love felt fragile, like a thread stretched too tight. Seraphine turned from him, staring into the endless dark. She remembered her father's stern voice, his hard love, his warnings. Now he was gone, and the town would blame her as much as Kael. Her breath hitched as she whispered into the night, "I don't even know who I am anymore." Behind her, Kael's voice was low, heavy with guilt. "You're the only good thing I've ever had." The words should have soothed her, but instead, they shattered her further, because good things never lasted. When morning came, Seraphine's sorrow hardened into steel. She braided her tangled hair with shaking fingers, strapped the rifle across her back, and met Kael's eyes with resolve. "If Deke did this, we'll prove it." Kael shook his head sharply. "That's suicide. The sheriff's already hungry to hang me. And now with your father gone, they'll string us both up without question." Seraphine's hands trembled, but her voice was fierce. "Then let them. I won't live hiding in shadows while my father's killer walks free." Kael's jaw clenched, torn between shielding her and respecting her fire. Finally, he cursed under his breath. "You're going to get yourself killed, girl." She stepped closer, her chin high, eyes blazing through her tears. Then let me die for something worth it. Silence hung thick before Kael pulled her into his arms, crushing her against him. His heartbeat thundered against her cheek, strong and steady, the only anchor she had left. "You're braver than you should be," he whispered, voice raw. "And one day it's going to break me." She clung tighter because she knew he was right. The road ahead would demand more than courage. It would demand blood. That night, Seraphine dreamed of her father. His voice echoed in her mind, stern but not unkind. "A woman's reputation is her life, child. Guard it with everything you've got." She woke with tears on her cheeks, Kael's arm heavy around her waist. The world had changed. Her reputation was ash, her family gone, her heart tethered to a man hunted by law and legend. And yet, as dawn painted the canyon walls in pale gold, she felt something unshakable take root. Her father was gone, but she was still here, alive. And as long as she breathed, she would carve her own path. When Kael stirred, she pressed her palm to his chest, steadying him. "We'll find Deke," she whispered, her voice steady. "We'll end this." His eyes opened slowly, sorrow swimming in their depths. He shook his head, but she saw the spark of resolve he couldn't hide. For the first time, it was not Kael leading and Seraphine following. It was both of them, side by side, bound by loss and fury. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried, circling above. To Seraphine, it felt like a warning. The storm wasn't just coming. It had already begun. The capture came at dawn, swift and merciless. Kael and Seraphine had been breaking camp when the thunder of hooves split the quiet. Before Kael could draw his revolver, a dozen rifles aimed down from the canyon rim. "Deke Holleran's man. Drop it, Maddox." Deke bellowed, his grin twisted with triumph. Seraphine's breath caught as Kael froze, his hand hovering near his gun. In that instant, she saw his mind working, fight, flee, or surrender. But with Seraphine at his side, he chose the only path left. He let the revolver fall. They bound his wrists in iron, the sound sharp as betrayal. Seraphine screamed, clawing at the men who tore him away. "No, don't take him." Her nails raked skin, her fist struck, but a backhanded blow sent her sprawling in the dust. Kael roared, straining against the chains, but a rifle slammed into his jaw, silencing him. Deke leaned close to Seraphine, his breath hot with whiskey. "Don't worry, sweetheart. You'll get a front row seat. Rope's already waiting in Willow Creek." As they dragged Kael away, Seraphine's heart shattered. Dust filled her mouth. Tears burned her eyes, but inside, a fire ignited. She would not let them kill him, not without a fight. Willow Creek had never been so alive. By midday, the town square swelled with bodies, the gallows standing tall like a vulture's perch. Children perched on barrels. Women whispered behind fans. Men shouted wagers on how long Kael Maddox would last before the rope snapped his neck. Seraphine pushed through the throng, bonnet pulled low, heart hammering against her ribs. She spotted him on the platform, wrists bound, lips split, one eye swollen shut. But even beaten, he stood tall. The sheriff strutted beside him, smug and sweating in the heat. "Justice will be served," he roared, holding the rope high. Seraphine's nails dug into her palms. Justice? This was no justice. This was spectacle. She bit back her scream, scanning the crowd for any chance, any weakness. That's when she saw Deke, leaning against a saloon post, arms folded, smirk painted across his face. The sight snapped everything into focus. It had always been Deke, her father's death, Kael's curse, the lies choking the town. He was the rod at the center of it all. And if she didn't act, Kael would die for his sins. Seraphine's breath steadied, her fear hardening into steel. She had only moments, but moments were all she needed. The sheriff stepped forward, unrolling a paper, his voice booming. Kael Maddox, guilty of murder, theft, and treason against the law of this town. The crowd erupted, some cheering, others spitting curses. Kael's eyes scanned the sea of faces, and for one fragile moment, they found Seraphine's. She froze, breath caught, as he mouthed a single word, "Run." But she didn't move. Instead, She pushed closer, slipping past gawkers until she stood near the platform steps. Every nerve screamed that she was a fool, that the next breath could be her last. But she would not leave him to die alone. The sheriff barked. "Any last words, Maddox?" Kael raised his chin, blood streaking his jaw, and his voice rang out hoarse but unbroken. "You'll hang the wrong man today." The crowd jeered, laughter rising. Deke's smirk widened. Seraphine felt rage boil over, her hands trembling as she pulled the folded paper from her dress pocket. The letter Kael had taken from a dying outlaw weeks ago. Proof of Deke's treachery. She held it tight, her heart racing. This was her chance, her only chance. If she failed, she would die with him. She drew a breath that felt like fire and stepped forward. "Stop." Her voice cracked across the square like a whip. The crowd gasped as Seraphine threw back her bonnet, her tear-streaked face revealed. Murmurs spread like wildfire. "Lane girl, she's with the outlaw." The sheriff's face darkened, sweat dripping down his temple. "Get her out of here." But Seraphine's voice cut sharper than his. "You're hanging the wrong man. My father, Elias Lane, was murdered, and it wasn't Kael Maddox who pulled the trigger." She thrust the paper high, her hand trembling but unyielding. "This letter proves it. Deke Halloran ordered it." Gasps rippled. All eyes turned to Deke, whose smirk faltered, rage flashing in his eyes. "Lies!" he spat, pushing through the crowd. But Seraphine's voice rose louder, fierce and unbroken. "I watched Kael fight to protect me, to protect this town from men like you. He's no saint, but he's no murderer." The square erupted into chaos, voices clashing, the sheriff shouting for order. Kael's chest heaved, his eyes blazing with desperate hope as he watched Seraphine defy them all. In that instant, the rope hanging above him no longer seemed inevitable. The tide had shifted, and Seraphine knew. If she could hold her ground, she might just save the man she loved. The crowd roared, torn between fury and doubt. Deke lunged for her, but Kael surged forward, chains rattling, slamming his shoulder into the outlaw leader. The platform shook, shouts rising as fists flew. Deputies rushed in, struggling to hold Kael, but the distraction gave Seraphine her moment. She vaulted onto the platform, shoving past the sheriff, her voice ringing out with everything she had left. "Look at him. Look at Deke Halloran. He's the one who profits from death, who hide behind lies while this town cheers for a hanging." Her words cut through the madness, some faces paling, others turning to Deke with suspicion. The sheriff barked orders, but doubt had already poisoned the mob. Deke drew his pistol, aiming for Kael, but Seraphine screamed, "No!" and hurled herself between them. The shot cracked, echoing like thunder. For a heartbeat, silence reigned, Seraphine gasping, the crowd frozen, Kael roaring as he broke free of his guards. In the chaos that followed, she wasn't sure she was alive or dying. All she knew was this. She would rather bleed here, in the open square, than watch Kael die with rope around his neck. And that choice changed everything. The square erupted in chaos. Smoke still hung from Deke's pistol as Seraphine staggered, the shot grazing her arm instead of piercing her chest. Kael's roar shook the air as he tore free of his guards, chains clattering against the wood. He launched himself at Deke, fist and fury, the two men crashing to boards in a blur of rage. The crowd screamed, some scattering, others chanting for blood. The sheriff barked orders, but doubt had spread too deep. Whispers of Deke's name with Elias Lane's murder began to ripple. Seraphine clutched her bleeding arm, forcing herself upright. She waved the blood-stained letter above her head, her voice breaking but fierce. "This proves it. Deke ordered my father's death. Frame Kael to take the fall." Faces shifted in the crowd, gasps and curses rising. Deke snarled beneath Kael's grip, spitting blood, but Kael's fist drove him into silence. Deputies swarmed, yanking them apart, but the people no longer cheered the hanging. They stared at Deke with suspicion, their faith in law and order crumbling. For the first time, Kael wasn't just an outlaw. He was a man wronged. And Seraphine, shaking, bleeding, unbroken, was the reason the truth had cracked open. The sheriff tried to seize control, shouting above the noise, "Don't listen! She's lying, protecting her outlaw lover. But a voice in the back cried out, "Then why is Deke running?" All eyes snapped to the outlaw leader, who had scrambled to his feet and shoved through the mob, pistol still in hand. The crowd parted, some shouting, some fleeing, as Kael tore after him, chains dragging. Seraphine stumbled forward, clutching her wound, her eyes locked on Kael's figure fighting through the chaos. The sheriff lunged for her, snarling, "You'll hang with him, girl." But before he could lay hands, townsfolk grabbed his arms, pulling him back. The tide had turned. Seraphine's voice rang out, hoarse but unyielding. "You all know Kael. You've seen him bleed, seen him hunted. But Deke Halloran, he profits from every corpse in this territory. Who will you believe? A man who hides in shadows, or the man who fought for his own truth?" Murmurs swelled, faces shifting from doubt to resolve. Kael and Deke clashed again near the saloon steps, the fight savage primal. Seraphine's heart pounded in her ears. Whatever happened in the next few breaths would decide everything. Kael's fate, her own, and the future they had dared to dream. The final showdown was brutal. Chains still bound Kael's wrists. He fought like a corner wolf, driving Deke back with blows that shook the boards. Deke slashed with a knife, the blade catching Kael's side, but Kael roared and slammed him into the saloon post. The crowd pressed close, gasping, shouting, their thirst for blood turning to hunger for truth. Seraphine pushed forward, screaming above the chaos. "Look at them. Who's the murderer? Who's the coward?" Deke's knife flashed again, but Kael twisted, sending it clattering to the dirt. With a final surge, Kael's chains wrapped around Deke's throat, pulling him down. The outlaw leader gasped, clawing, his face purple as the crowd stared in stunned silence. At the last moment, Kael released him, shoving him to the ground. "I'm not you," Kael spat, chest heaving. Deputies swarmed, finally seizing Deke, dragging him away in shackles as the people roared. This time not for Kael's death, but for Deke's. Seraphine reached Kael's side, her trembling hands touching his bloodied face. His eyes softened as they locked onto hers. "You saved me," he whispered, disbelief thick in his voice. She shook her head fiercely. "No, we saved each other." By nightfall, Willow Creek was changed. Deke sat locked in the jailhouse, his smirk gone, his power broken. The sheriff, stripped of authority by the townsfolk's fury, was forced to release Kael Maddox. Chains clattered to the floor, leaving raw bruises on his wrists. Seraphine stood beside him, arm bound with cloth, her chin high despite exhaustion. The same crowd that had once cheered for his death now parted in silence, some ashamed, some awed. No one dared spit, no one dared jeer. Kael's gaze swept over them, hard and unyielding, before he turned away. Seraphine took his hand, their fingers lacing tight, and together they walked on the gallows that had nearly claimed him. At the edge of town, Kael paused, staring at the horizon where the desert stretched endless and wild. "We can't stay," he said quietly. "They'll never forget what I am." Seraphine squeezed his hand, her voice steady. "Then let them remember. Let them whisper. We'll make our life where their voices can't reach." His eyes softened, the hardness in him easing just enough. For the first time, he didn't argue. Together, they mounted the chestnut mare, turning their backs on Willow Creek forever. The horizon burned gold as the sun sank, painting the sky in fire and ash. Seraphine leaned into Kael's chest, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat grounding her against the storm of the past weeks. Behind them lay betrayal, death, and a town that had once demanded his neck. Ahead lay only uncertainty, but also freedom, the kind neither had ever dared believe in. Kael pressed his lips to her hair, his voice low, almost broken. "You should have had a life better than this." She turned in the saddle, meeting his gaze with fierce certainty. "I don't want better. I want this. I want you." His eyes shimmered, raw and unguarded, as if her words had struck deeper than any bullet. He pulled her close, his hand trembling against her cheek. "Then I'll spend every day proving you're right." The desert wind rose around them, carrying dust and the faint scent of mesquite. As the last light faded, Kael and Seraphine rode into the dark, two silhouettes bound not by law or blood, but by love stronger than chains, stronger than death. Their story had begun in shadows, but now it stretched wide across the horizon, wild, untamed, and theirs.